Hello there, Qckslvrslash here, and while a new operation is out, today's video is going to focus on something different because it's coming and it's going to be here soon, and that is our next season of ranked battles. And based on the post today on Wargaming site and what's happening in the test server, I think it's safe to say the next ranked season is going to be at tier 6. And I'm getting this video out as quick as I can, mostly because I'm guessing many of you, like me, probably need to put some work into the tier 6 ships to get them ready for a ranked season. So I'm going to do a quick rundown on what I think of each class at the tier. If you look in the description, I'm going to try to put in URLs so you can jump to maybe the section you focus on. And we're going to dive into it right away with the destroyers. And the destroyers are going to be something interesting because you've got, the Japanese DDs, good torpedoes, and decent range at 8K. The Farragut suffers from the early American destroyer problem of not being able to really reach out and touch things with the torps. At 5.5 kilometers, you're detected long before you're able to launch them, and that's going to be a disadvantage. And it's why I think you're going to see more of the Japanese destroyers, such as the Shinanomi, the ship that everyone got for free if you've completed the necessary campaigns. As far as the tech tree tier 6 destroyers, you've got the Fubuki and Hatsuharu, and I think both are adequate. And you can see I don't have either of them, and I'm gonna need to put the time in, repurchase them, because the Fubuki with 10-kilometer torpedoes needs to be respected, and with the right build, you can get the guns to a spot where they're adequate enough. But breaking those sets up into 3 really does help the Fubuki. Now, as far as the Hatsuharu, she is also a very good choice. I had a lot of fun in this ship when it first came out, and I'm going to be rebuying these because I'm going to train up captains. I'm going to have the options available. Now, outside of the Japanese, I've already touched on the American, and the Anshan has the same issue. Good gunboat is missing longer range torpedoes. The best she gets are 8K, which, they're good. And with detectability in that, you can stealth fire. So I think you're going to see the Anshan. The downside is, A, it's a premium ship, so you can't just go out and buy it, and B, you can't pull the commander from something else. Like for my Farragut, I'm probably just going to retrain my Benson captain or something for a period of time. And I guess after speaking, 6.4 is what you can get the torps up to. Now, where I think it becomes a little interesting, and I can't confirm this, but in previous seasons you have been allowed to, say, bring tier 5s, because in previous seasons it's been 7 and 8. And if they do allow tier 5s to participate for a little bit, I'd expect to see some Nicholases out there. And the simple fact is, with the Nicholas's torpedo setup, 2 racks on each side really gives you flexibility. And the other ship I would really expect to see a lot of, if tier 5s are a possibility, is the invisible one that is a premium vessel for the Japanese, and that is the Kamikaze, or Kamikaze R. It's a devilish little ship and can really put on the damage. Now, the Ernst Gade, I really don't know. I had a lot of trouble with this ship. I didn't like it. It does have 150s and can do some damage, but with destroyers really being relied on to help conceal their fleet, having that shorter German smoke really going to hurt you. And fully upgraded 8-kilometer torpedoes, you can just stealth fire, but kind of like the Anshan, when you've got such a low gap between your torpedoes and detectability, you can run yourself into trouble really easily thinking you can stealth fire some torps. But on to the next class of ships, and that is going to be the cruisers. And the cruisers is where things gets really interesting for me. So in the tech tree, you've got the Cleveland, but I really feel the Cleveland has been replaced by the Bajoni. To me, the Bajoni's guns just perform a lot better than the Cleveland. Now, they both do kind of suffer from armor, but pretty much all cruisers at this tier don't really have armor. I just find the straighter, lower trajectory of the Bajoni shells is really going to carry her through. Beyond that, I really think the Leander is going to be a ship you see a lot of. In the previous season, everyone remembers the Belfasts, the Atlantas, the Flints. Well, having a cruiser that can conceal itself is massively useful, and maybe we'll see some Perths, but I don't expect a lot of them just because you kind of have to stay moving. That smoke's always generating, you don't get longer puffs. The Leander really offers flexibility, and at tier 7 I loved the Fiji in ranked. I think it was really underrated. These guns can rip things apart. You've got the smoke, you've got torpedoes to prevent it push, and you have hydro. It really makes it a flexible ship. Now, there are some additional premiums to consider. Beyond something like the Perth, you've got the Duca d'Aosta, and she's a good ship. The guns, to me, have performed well. I wouldn't say they're great, but they do well. Similar to the Bajoni's guns, really, in my opinion. The turrets are a little slow, but she's got some great torpedoes, 12 kilometers. The only problem is they're about as fast as sea mines. They're not going anywhere quick. The advantage you get is you get a spotting plane, defensive AA, and hydro. Once again, adding to the flexibility of the ship. Hydroacoustic is always important, particularly if you're trying to deal with a lot of DDs out there and a lot of torps coming your way. Knowing a little bit sooner, massively going to benefit you. Another tier 6 cruiser that many may forget and was earnable for free is the Graf Spee. And I think the HSF, the Blue Mermaid High School Fleet crossover Graf Spee, is coming to the store soon. So those who don't have her will be able to get the Graf Spee with a slightly different paint and I believe different captains, unfortunately. But this is a good ship. It's fast enough. It's not super fast, and that's something to consider, but 30 knots. Decent guns. You've only got 2 turrets, though. That kind of hurts her, but they are bigger. They're the 283s that the Scharnhorst had, and everyone remembers how many Scharnhorsts were in the last season of Ranked. It really was a strong ship. And what really sets the Graf Spee apart is the torpedo arcs on her. These torpedo tubes can fire almost straight forward, and that makes her really effective for attack. And more importantly, 8-kilometer range, a little further than standard German cruisers. Speaking of German cruisers, there is the Nuremberg. I don't expect to see her very often. To me, the Nuremberg is just a little underpowered. The guns are in the rear. You know, I love the Königsberg, but Nuremberg's just being that little bit taller, a little bit bigger, always seem to explode, and I personally will not be picking this ship up for ranked. There are going to be people who can make her work. It's just not a ship I play well in. One other one I am forgetting are the Japanese, and I think you're going to have to respect Japan. The Aoba is a fearsome ship. It can really do work in the right hands. The 203s, great guns. The one potential downside is the torpedoes. They fire, only really astern of the ship. That makes her a tricky ship to attack with. And then the other downside is I find the Aoba alone can't do much. It can be very tricky. You need to be able to keep your range. And if you end up even one-on-one against something like a Cleveland, you're hooped. I'd rather be in the Cleveland. It just seems to perform better rate of fire, and it can eat through these Aobas. But in a team situation where maybe you can just sit back and do damage, your team really takes the tanking role, I think she's going to be a decent ship. And that pretty much wraps it up because I can't personally look at the Perth. I'm not sure she's going to be around too much. And as far as the French go, the Qckslvrslash, not a bad ship, but kind of suffers, I think, the same issue as the Aoba. Now, I did like this ship. It was fun to grind through. It was kind of like a Nuremberg with the guns in the right orientation for this game. Because it's an arcade game, the guns on the back really can hurt you. So having 6 barrels up front, very handy. The rate of fire good, but once again, hurt a little bit by just the size. She's a very big cruiser for her tier and really does better at staying off on a flank, working ships down slowly. How this will directly impact her, I don't know. It's a good ship, 9-kilometer torpedoes, although she's only got 2 aside. That definitely hurts. It's gonna be tricky to say if this will be a good ship or not in ranked. I really do think the strongest cruisers are your Bajoni and the Leander. Into battleships, well, that's where things I think get really interesting because there's a wide variety of them and they kind of all do something a little bit different. Now you've got the New Mexico and Arizona. Similar ships, characteristics are a little bit different. I think they're going to be popular. They can do damage and can take a good beating. The Bayern, much the same. The downside to the Bayern is these twin barrel turrets and just poor penetration characteristics, at least I find, out of the main guns, hurt her. What really helps her is, man, can the Bayern tank a lot of damage. I really enjoyed this ship. There's a reason I kept it. I haven't played it much since I've kept it, and you can see I accidentally sold off the better modules when they added in the depot to the game. But I think she could be an interesting choice. That said, I really do think the smaller, higher velocity guns out of these Americans will perform better. Another one that might come into the play is the Warspite. There's a lot of people out there who really don't like the Warspite. And I can kind of get why. It's a big ship, this massive main tower, really easy to hit. But the Warspite can hang in there. The Grand Old Lady is tough and she doesn't give up easily. The guns, they can leave a bit to be desired. Once again, only 2 barrels a turret like the Bayern, but they're bigger. The accuracy leaves something to be desired, and really what I think ultimately hurts her is the range. 16.3 kilometers, and that is with some upgrades. I think I've got the right upgrades. Maybe I don't. Maybe that's why her range could be better. Oh, there is no range upgrade. So that's going to hurt her. That 16.3, when you compare it to, you know, something like 18.6 or even further when you stretch it out to the Fuso, who takes it at 21.8, that's where the Warspite's going to be left hurting. And she's not a ship that does very well in tight just because of how slow the turrets are. Now, moving on, we do have the Fuso, and the Fuso is going to be popular. Much like the Amagi at Tier 8, it can really deal out the damage. And without a ton of superstructure, you know, it does have one very tall main tower on her, but that forward house just, it can be hard to hit, and there's not a lot else on the deck, so I find she doesn't, in my experience, take as much HE damage, and it's hard for, you know, ships to just kind of pump damage into your upper decks, things like a Leander. But kind of like the Congo, the Fuso to me is vulnerable to the Citadels in ways that some of the other battleships at this tier just aren't. And I don't think that's really going to be a big enough detractor for people to avoid her. These 6 double-barreled turrets really just allow you to spread the damage around, and you know, anyone who's played the Fuso a lot knows the amount of work she can do in the right hands. And for that reason, I think you're going to see a lot of the Fuso as one of the main battleships. One of the interesting options is the Dunkirk. And much like last week's operation, the Defensive Naval Station Newport, I really think the Dunkirk is well suited to ranked games, and that's because all her firepower is up front. And when you think about the ranked meta and how often the games can just be stationary, you know, wars of attrition, being able to go bow in, properly angle your armor at a target, and fire all your guns at them is very useful, and the Dunkirk's great at that. I mean, it's what she's built to do. The reload time's a little bit better, makes her slightly more flexible, but the guns are a little smaller, so you have to be careful with your ammunition choice. Now, I know this isn't a ship that many people have because a lot of community contributors seem to really hate on the ship when it came out. I disagreed. I really had fun in it, and I think I'll have some fun in her this rank season and probably play a bit in her just to see how she feels, because I really do feel the Dunkirk is going to be a good choice. Just her ability to put massive amounts of fire down onto a single target in one click. Helps her out. And I've absolutely wrecked destroyers and cruisers with this ship in ways that other battleships can't. And I know when I did the review of this, people commented, I'm like, oh, destroyer showed its side, it's dead. And they're like, well, cruiser showed its side, it's dead. Well, any battleship could have done that. Well, they couldn't because they didn't have all their firepower. I was driving or sailing straight at the cruiser when it came around to edge of land. Any other battleship would be caught with most of their gun power out of commission. The Dunkirk isn't, and that makes her very good for pushing. So with the right team and a team mentality that you're gonna push hard, the Dunkirk is gonna be a fun ship. And that pretty much rounds off all the battleships. Whether or not we see the rumored Russian battleships or some of them that are coming, I don't know. There's been a couple rumors about there could be British battleships on the horizon, but I think ranked will be here before any of that content comes our way. Which means there is only one more class, and that is CVs. And I don't think this is too big a stretch or argument. I feel the better carrier is the Ryuju, or Ryujo. The flexibility of her air squadrons is what gives her an advantage. And personally, you can see I'm 3-1-1. With 3 fighter squadrons, you can claim air superiority, and you've still got one of each attack squadron. But you can mix it up in other ways that the Americans just can't. And that's why when there are CVs, this is the ship I expect to bring. Because when you compare it to the US, and the independents, it's just not a fair fight. So you've got 1-1-1, 2-0-1, which, okay, 2 squadrons against 3, and then you're left with 1 dive bomber squadron to do damage, or 0-1-2. Well, you're not coming to a fight with ranked teams where you've got those smaller team sizes without the ability to control the air, which really leaves you with either 1 fighter squadron or 2. Now, I did have a game in my Ranger just a while back where I was running 1-1-1, and I got clear skies. The fighter squadrons on these ships are good. The issue is I was playing against a bit of a numpty of a CV player. They just weren't playing well. They weren't aware of some of the abilities CVs have, like the ability to strafe out of a lock. And because of that, I got to take advantage of them. In ranked, that's not going to be a thing. Most people bringing carriers to ranked play carriers as their primary class. They're going to be decent in them. There's always going to be exceptions to that, but there's exceptions to that across the line. Doesn't matter what ship you bring to ranked, there's going to be occasional people who are there trying to have fun, trying to learn ranked, and maybe just don't play the best. Try to give them a bit of a break. I know I'm going to try to be a little friendlier this season. The stress can always get a little high when you're playing it competitive. It's a limited window to get there. Even more so when people have full schedules doing other things and you can only get a little bit of time to sit down and you've got people on your team just not playing smart. But as far as CVs, it's going to be the Ryuju. I will bite my tongue if there's people who can make the independence work. I've generally in previous seasons tried to be like, every ship is viable. But just in the CVs, I do question the independence's viability because in my experience grinding through these ships, the Ryujo is just a much better ship. And case in point, I still have it. Whereas I've long since gotten rid of my independence. But that is a quick rundown of what we're going to see in ranked. I'm going to dive into a couple ships a little more as I play them and get commanders trained up and really hopefully discuss some of the tactics I expect to see as the maps get announced. Because, well, there's going to be a new map specifically designed for ranked. It's in the test server. I may actually download that client and play some test server games just to get a good feeling of how the map plays. We will see on that. but expect more content as this season comes closer. And when it does hit, I wish everyone the best of luck. I think it's going to be interesting because there's no longer things like radar. There's still going to be a ton of smoke. Hydro is really going to matter a lot in how you employ your hydro. And I suspect this season's going to get really frustrating like many of the previous ones have. And that lack of radar, I really do question bringing it down to this tier, because at the higher tiers, everyone knows radar exists and you make plays based on that. Without it, at the low tiers, it really is going to be a standoff, and some games will just come down to the team that's able to perpetually keep themselves entirely smoked. Anyways, I hope this is informative. As I said, there's going to be more, and as always, I'm Qckslvrslash, and I'll have another one for you just a little later today because I had a great game in my Des Moines that I want to share, and not everyone's interested in what's happening in ranked.